My darling Leo, I see you. Tonight I want to speak to something considerably quieter than most of my readings. Because your home, my darling, has been trying to tell you something for a while now, and I do not think you have been entirely listening. Astrology forecast for tonight, my darling. Your home is asking for a new chapter, whatever that actually means for your own particular life right now. Downsizing, redecorating, an outright move, or simply a change to the emotional weather of the rooms you already live inside. I want to give you the real reason your home specifically has been asking, because it is genuinely, structurally different from almost anything else I have ever explained to you about your own sign. I am Madame Aurora, 35 years studying the stars from my office in Manhattan, and let me tell you something, your ruling planet does not do particularly well, however much it excels at almost everything else. Your ruling planet is the sun, my darling, and the sun governs your public self, your radiance, the part of you that is seen, admired, warmed by an audience of some kind. Home, however, has never actually belonged to the sun. It belongs, in every tradition this practice has ever produced, to the moon, the quieter, more private body, governing the rooms nobody else needs to witness in order for them to matter, the comfort that requires no applause, the atmosphere that exists purely for you, alone, rather than for anybody currently watching. My darling, I want you to sit with the size of that difference, because I think it explains a great deal about why home has quietly become the one part of your life you have neglected, even while everything more visible has continued receiving your considerable attention. I want to name this without judgment, because it is not a character flaw. It is simply the natural consequence of a chart organized the way yours is. You have spent a lifetime being genuinely, deservedly good at the sun's own particular work, and nobody ever quite taught you the separate, equally legitimate skill the moon requires, which has nothing to do with being seen and everything to do with simply, quietly, being present with yourself. You are extremely skilled at creating warmth for other people to witness. You are, comparatively, considerably less practiced at creating comfort that exists purely, privately, for you, with nobody else in the room to appreciate it. Your home is not asking you to perform a new chapter for anybody. It is asking you, quietly, to finally give the moon's own particular attention to a part of your life the sun has been, understandably, too busy elsewhere to properly tend. Let me show you the card I have chosen for you tonight, because it shows you exactly what that private, unwitnessed attention actually looks like. The card is the Queen of Pentacles. A queen, seated on a throne carved with fruit and small, abundant creatures, holds a single pentacle in her lap, gazing down at it steadily. Around her, a lush, private garden, flourishing, entirely her own. And in the corner of nearly every traditional rendering of this card, a rabbit, quiet, undisturbed, perfectly at ease. Everybody reads this card the same way, and I do not think the popular reading is wrong. Comfort, material security, genuinely, warmly held, domestic abundance. That is exactly what the card means. But look at where her attention actually is, my darling, because it is the detail almost nobody mentions. She is not looking outward, toward a viewer, toward an audience, the way several of the other queens in this deck are shown doing. She is looking down, at her own lap, at her own garden, entirely absorbed in something that requires no witness at all in order to be worth tending. And the rabbit, my darling, because it is the whole of tonight's lesson, contained in a single small creature. Rabbits do not thrive in disturbed, exposed, constantly observed environments. They require genuine safety, genuine quiet, in order to settle at all. Its presence in this card is not decoration. It is confirmation that the space itself has become safe enough, private enough, undisturbed enough, for something genuinely vulnerable to actually rest there. That is what your own home is asking to become, my darling. Not another stage. A garden quiet enough for the rabbit to finally settle. Let me speak to your belongings specifically, my darling, because I think this is where a considerable portion of what your home has been asking actually lives. Your sign tends to accumulate objects that once served a purpose your current self no longer requires, the trophies of a former chapter, the gifts kept out of guilt rather than genuine affection, the furniture chosen to impress a version of a guest list you rarely actually host anymore. I want you to walk through your own home this week and ask, honestly, of each significant object, whether it currently serves your own comfort, or whether it is simply performing a version of your life for an audience that is, most days, not actually there to see it. This is not a demand to discard everything sentimental, my darling. Memory objects, genuinely cherished, deserve to stay exactly where they are. What I am asking you to examine is the considerable difference between an object that comforts you privately and one that exists, quietly, to be admired by whoever happens to visit, because I suspect your home currently holds more of the second category than you have fully noticed, and each one of them is a small, ongoing performance rather than a genuine source of the private peace tonight's reading is actually about. I want to give you a specific, honest test, my darling, because sentiment and performance can look remarkably alike from the outside. Ask yourself, of any given object, whether you would keep it exactly where it is if you knew, with total certainty, that no visitor would ever see it again. If the answer is yes, my darling, it belongs in the first category, genuinely yours, regardless of how it happens to look to anybody else. If the answer changes the moment the audience disappears, you have found something worth releasing, or at least moving somewhere considerably less central to the life you are actually trying to build. Now, let me speak to comfort, my darling, and I want to correct something specific, because your sign has a particular relationship with the word that is worth examining honestly. Comfort, for you, has very often meant impressive comfort, a beautiful, well-appointed space designed to communicate a certain quality of life to anybody who sees it. My darling, I want to introduce a different kind entirely tonight, because I do not think anybody has ever properly named the distinction for you before. Unwitnessed comfort. The specific chair nobody else particularly likes, the lighting that flatters nothing except your own actual mood, the small, unglamorous ritual that would mean nothing to a guest and means everything to you at the end of an ordinary day. This kind of comfort rarely photographs well, and it very often looks, to an outside eye, considerably less impressive than the version you have been curating. It is also, in my considerable experience, the only kind that actually restores you, because it was never built for anybody's approval in the first place. I want to give you a specific way to actually find it, because unwitnessed comfort can be surprisingly difficult to identify once you have spent years curating the visible kind instead. Notice, honestly, what you reach for on the evenings when you are genuinely alone, entirely unobserved, with no plans, and no expectation of anybody arriving. Not what you would choose if a guest were coming. What your body actually wants, on those specific evenings, when the only person you are answering to is yourself. That instinct, my darling, followed consistently rather than overridden in favor of something more presentable, is the actual beginning of the comfort tonight's reading is asking you to build. And memories, my darling, which I want to speak to gently, because I think this is where a good deal of hesitation about actually changing anything tends to live. You may be holding on to a particular arrangement, a particular room, exactly as it has always been, out of a fear that changing it means dishonoring whatever memory it currently holds. I want to tell you plainly, the memory does not live in the furniture. It lives in you, and it will travel with you, fully intact, whether the chair stays exactly where it has always stood or moves, eventually, somewhere new. Honoring a memory has never actually required freezing a room in place forever. If it helps, my darling, choose one small, portable object from the room you are most reluctant to change, something you can genuinely keep close, on a shelf or a bedside table, wherever the rest of the room eventually goes. Let that single object carry the memory forward, deliberately, so the rest of the space is finally free to serve your actual, present life, rather than remaining a museum built around a single, unmoving arrangement of furniture. Let me speak briefly to the actual, practical forms this new chapter might take, my darling, because tonight's reading is meant to be usable rather than only philosophical. If downsizing is genuinely calling to you, notice whether the resistance you feel is actually about the space itself, or about a fear that a smaller home somehow signals a smaller life. My darling, it does not. A well-tended smaller space, genuinely suited to how you actually live now, produces considerably more real comfort than a larger one, maintained primarily to justify its own size. If redecorating is calling to you, begin with the room you actually spend the most unwitnessed time in, rather than the room guests see first. Your sign's instinct will pull toward the entrance, the living room, whatever space performs your life most visibly. Resist that pull, just this once, and tend to wherever you actually rest. If an outright move is genuinely on your mind, trust it considerably more than your own hesitation wants you to. A home that has stopped suiting the person you have become is not a failure of loyalty to the person who chose it originally. I want to name the specific guilt your sign tends to attach to this particular decision, because it rarely announces itself plainly. You may worry that wanting to move somehow dishonors the effort, the money, the years spent making the current home what it is. My darling, none of that effort disappears simply because you eventually choose something different. It was genuinely, fully lived, and it prepared you, considerably, for whatever comes next. Moving on from a well-loved home is not a rejection of everything that home gave you. It is simply the next, honest chapter of a life that has, quite reasonably, continued changing. And if what you actually need is simply privacy, or a change to the emotional atmosphere rather than anything physical at all, that is entirely legitimate too, my darling. Sometimes the new chapter a home is asking for is not a renovation. It is a door, kept closed a little more often, a boundary around who gets invited into the actual, private rooms rather than only the ones arranged for visitors. Let me tell you about Verina, because I think her story shows exactly how small this actual shift can be, once someone finally lets herself make it. Verina was a Leo client of mine who had lived, for close to 15 years, in a beautifully maintained home she had always described, to me and to everyone else, as exactly what she wanted. She came to me in a period of quiet restlessness she could not entirely explain, given that nothing about the house had actually changed, and given that she genuinely, by her own account, loved it. I asked her to walk me through an ordinary evening at home, in detail. She described, almost automatically, tidying the already tidy living room before she allowed herself to relax. A habit she realized, mid-sentence, she performed even on evenings when nobody was coming over, when no guest would ever see whether the cushions were arranged precisely or not. I asked her, gently, what she actually wanted to do with a genuinely private evening if the tidying were not required. She sat with the question for a long time, longer than she expected to need. She told me, eventually, that she had always wanted a small reading corner, unglamorous, slightly worn, entirely her own, in a spare room she had instead kept formally arranged for guests who, she admitted, visited perhaps twice a year. She made the change over a single weekend. Not a renovation. A single, comfortable chair moved into the spare room, a lamp that flattered nothing except her own evening reading, and permission, finally given to herself, to leave it slightly untidy between uses. She told me, some months later, that the restlessness had genuinely quieted, not because the house had transformed, but because one small room had finally, entirely, stopped performing for an audience that rarely arrived, and started existing purely for her. I asked her whether she had told the rare visitors who did eventually see the room what had changed and why. She said she had, once, almost apologetically, and had been genuinely surprised by the response. The friend had told her the room finally felt like somewhere Verina actually lived, rather than somewhere she simply kept things nicely arranged. Verina said, "I think I had assumed a slightly worn, genuinely used room would look like I had let something slip. It turned out to look, to somebody who actually loved me, like I had finally let her see something real." If any of this has landed, my darling, tap that little like button below this video. It helps this reading find somebody else who has been tidying an already tidy room for an audience that rarely actually arrives. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment, because I make readings like this one for every sign, and I would love for you to be here when the next one arrives. Leave me a comment, my darling, and tell me, in a word or a short phrase, which of tonight's parts touched something real, belongings, comfort, memories, or simply the atmosphere itself. I read every single comment, truly, and a comment section full of women, each naming her own honest word, is a room full of people quietly discovering how many of them have been maintaining a home built for a viewer who rarely, if ever, actually walks through the door. Now let me give you the ritual, and I want you to actually walk through your own space while you do this one, my darling, rather than simply thinking about it from a chair. Find 20 minutes and walk, room by room, through your own home. A soft, warm white candle if you like one, for the moon's own gentler light. And if you have none, my darling, it changes nothing, because the object was never the mechanism. In each room, ask yourself one honest question. Does this space currently exist for me, or for whoever might someday see it? Take a piece of paper and write down the one room that answered performance most clearly, and the one room, if any, that already, genuinely answered comfort. Beneath both, write one small, specific change you are actually willing to make this month. In the performance room, moving it, even slightly, toward genuine, private comfort, the way Verina's single chair did. Keep the page, my darling, and return to it once the change is actually made. Notice, honestly, whether the restlessness that brought you to tonight's reading has genuinely quieted, the way Verina's eventually did, once one small corner of her own home finally stopped waiting for an audience. Now, my darling, let me give you the thing I have been building toward the whole of this hour. I want to return, one final time, to the rabbit in tonight's card, quiet, undisturbed, settled somewhere genuinely safe. I want to give you the full weight of that image now, because I think it answers something you have very likely never quite let yourself ask directly, which is whether you are actually allowed to have a version of your life that nobody else ever sees or appreciates. My darling, you are. I want to say that as plainly as I possibly can. The considerable admiration you generate everywhere else, the warmth you offer so generously to every room you enter, has never once required you to also perform inside your own front door, in the hours when nobody else is actually present to receive it. The rabbit does not settle because the garden is impressive. It settles because the garden is safe, quiet, and entirely unconcerned with being seen. That is the actual new chapter your home has been asking you for, my darling. Considerably smaller and considerably more available than any renovation could ever manage on its own. Not a bigger stage. A genuinely private garden, finally allowed to simply exist for you. My darling, before I let you go, 3 small things. 1. If any part of this reading found you tonight, if you recognized your own automatic tidying in Verina's story, or your own performed comfort in the belongings I asked you to examine, tap that like button. It helps this reading find somebody else who needs exactly this permission tonight. 2. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because I make readings like this one for every sign, and I would love for you to be here when the next one arrives. 3. And this is the one I care about most. One word: belongings, comfort, memories, or atmosphere. And if this reading gave you something and you ever want to say thank you more directly, a super thanks is never expected and always felt. And it is a genuine part of how I keep making these readings as carefully as I make them. If you know another Leo who has been quietly performing comfort rather than actually resting in it, send this to her tonight. You may not realize how much a single share matters. It is how this work finds the person who needs it. Thank you, my darling. This community has become something I genuinely did not expect when I began. Your home is asking for a new chapter. That is the title. And I want to close by telling you exactly what I mean by it, because it is not entirely what you thought when this hour began. It does not mean a renovation, or a move, or a dramatic overhaul is required in order to finally, properly rest. It means the moon's own quieter attention, the kind your radiant, generous sun has understandably been too busy elsewhere to give, is finally being asked for, in whatever small or large form actually suits your own particular life right now, so that at least one room, at least one corner, at least one evening, can exist purely, privately, for you, with no audience required in order for it to matter. Belongings, examined honestly. Comfort, unwitnessed and genuinely yours. Memories, carried in you rather than frozen in furniture. And the atmosphere itself, finally allowed to change, quietly, into something your own private rabbit can actually settle inside. Let one room stop performing, my darling. See what settles there once it finally does. I am Madame Aurora from Manhattan, and I love you, my dear Leo. I will see you in the next reading.